Hey, so this is a bit of a quick video because I'm finally free of an NDA related to one of the games I wanted to talk about for this topic. Supervive is an upcoming hero-based top-down battle royale game from Theorycraft Games, formerly codenamed Project Loki, that I've been fortunate enough to get to test a few times over the last couple weeks. Conveniently, last month I also got to participate in the closed alpha test for Marvel Rivals, and as someone who's been heavily invested in Overwatch over the last almost decade, I've enjoyed them both a lot. Rivals feels very comfortable given my experience with Overwatch, and while it had some flaws, I really enjoyed it, and I've missed it a lot since the alpha test ended. Supervive is a lot further outside of my wheelhouse, and while getting used to the controls and everything that was going on was a bit more of a challenge for me, I still had a lot of fun. However, while I was playing both games, I had a bit of a gnawing feeling of concern in the pit of my stomach because I fear that they haven't learned from the biggest mistake that Overwatch made as a new game. And that's what I want to talk about in this one. Also, while I haven't been given a bunch of invite codes to the upcoming Marvel Rivals beta test in July, I do have a stack of codes for Supervive that I'm free to hand out how I please. And if you stick around to the end of the video, I'll tell you how you can get your hands on them. Anyways, on to the video. We're not doing like chapters or parts or whatever for this one. I'm trying to keep it short and manageable so I can still get the Your Turn to Die video out on Friday, and that one has accidentally become a massive rabbit hole that I've fallen down and can't escape. Hope you guys enjoy these stupidly long videos about niche visual novels. We'll see if the inescapable momentum carries into that. So, when it comes to the original sin of Overwatch, there are a few things people might be thinking of. Is it its fixation on trying to develop this franchised esports scene? Is it an unclear vision for how to progress its narrative? Is it its monetization practices? Well, I think that all of those are problems for Overwatch. In fact, they're all problems that I've previously made videos about. I don't think any of them are the original sin. To me, those are all things that Blizzard could overcome by changing their policies or practices, but the original sin is different. Something that the game has had to try its best to work around in a way that's kneecapped its ability to grow as a game both casually and competitively. And for me, that's the imbalanced roster at launch. When Overwatch first came out, there were 12 DPS heroes split into offense and defense, a split that I firmly believe only happened because it would disguise the fact that a majority of the roster were DPS heroes compared to just 5 tanks and 4 supports. In fact, it's really 13 DPS heroes and 3 supports because Symmetra was a support in name and name alone, but again, they moved characters around to make the rosters look less unbalanced. The offense/defense roles and the classification of Sim as a support were 2 of the immediate consequences of the unbalanced roles, but they're not the only ones. Supports were in the worst position because the lack of heroes who could actually heal meant that the ones you had to be able to do more, which is a big part of why Mercy was the way she was. She was the only support who could offer primary healing output at launch, and so it made sense to make her more accessible and more powerful. Res in particular made a lot more sense back when healing output was just generally lower and it wasn't as hard to kill someone. Now, why is this the original sin? For one, it meant that DPS had the most varied playstyles available to it at launch, making it even more attractive as a role. And that's a problem when you need people to play all roles to make a team work, especially when DPS is kinda already the default most appealing role to most people. As time has gone on, we've seen that it's not like it's impossible for Overwatch to have really creative, distinctive heroes in all 3 roles, and if we'd had a more even balance of it at the start, we might have seen Overwatch develop into a more healthy game in terms of balance. To put this into some context, as of June 2024, there are 12 tanks and 10 supports in Overwatch. It took 8 years for Overwatch to get as many tanks as it had official DPS on day 1, and there are still fewer supports in Overwatch right now than there were DPS on day 1. Imagine how different the game would have been if it had launched with like 7 heroes in each role instead of 12 to 13, 5, and 4 to 3. Imagine how it would have improved queue times, particularly once Overwatch implemented role queue. More importantly, imagine how differently Blizzard could have approached hero design both before and after that release if they weren't trying to patch gaps in the roster the way they've had to. Mercy, Lucio, and Zenyatta had to be developed and released the way they were because they needed to be able to provide enough coverage for the supports to be meaningfully useful. But what if they'd been joined at launch by, say, the next 4 supports that eventually came out? Ana, Moira, Brigitte, and Baptiste. Having more supports would have meant there was way less pressure for any one of them to be a one-size-fits-all solution, allowing for them to be designed to be more niche and balanced within a broader support ecosystem the way that the DPS were. Instead, we ended up with hero kits like Mercy's that made sense when she was one of only 3 real supports, but makes less and less sense for the game as time goes on because the role she was created to fill has been chipped away by every new support hero added. A more balanced roster at launch would have also meant that there was more dynamic gameplay in all roles right from the jump, as opposed to having to wait until 2019, 3 years post-launch, to get up to just 7 different actual supports. Same goes for tanks, and I think we legitimately wouldn't have had the same issues with queue times that we ended up with if it wasn't for Blizzard putting all the emphasis on DPS heroes right out of the gate and making tanks and supports feel like afterthoughts. It also would have meant that the post-launch DLC heroes didn't have to try and fill gaps so much, and instead there could have been more of a focus on releasing new heroes in all roles at an even pace rather than having to try and prioritize the tanks and supports just to try and catch up with the DPS numbers. Out of the 20 heroes who have been added since launch, including Space Ranger who isn't out yet but is confirmed to be a support, there have been 6 new DPS heroes, 8 supports, and 6 tanks. But then Doomfist got moved to the tank role with Overwatch 2, so it's really more like 5, 8, and 7 respectively. This kind of ends up annoying everyone, because both tank and support players want more heroes in their roles to balance it out, and it annoys them when other roles, especially DPS, get new ones. But it also annoys people when one role is getting back-to-back new heroes like supports have gotten a few times. Anyways, all this is to say that my opinion is that the original sin of Overwatch, one that still haunts it to this day, is its decision to launch with an unbalanced roster that had a focus on DPS heroes above all else. It's one that's had negative consequences for the game's balance, for its community health, and for the options available to developers going forward. I know Overwatch is not the first or only game to be guilty of this, but I think in terms of the modern landscape of class-based games, it's one of the ones that looms largest. And so, when it comes to new games in this sort of field, that's the first thing I look for. I want to know that a game is going to be healthy and sustainable, and one of the easiest ways for a game to look like it's going to struggle is that unbalanced roster. It's not a kiss of death, to be clear. Games can still succeed in spite of that, but it is concerning. Unfortunately, it kind of feels like Marvel Rivals and Supervive haven't really learned this lesson, and it does make me a bit concerned about them both. Marvel Rivals categorizes its heroes as duelists, vanguards, and strategists, which are really just DPS, tank, and support. As of the closed alpha test, there were 5 vanguards, 4 strategists, and 10 duelists out of 19 characters. And not gonna lie, this feels way too close to the mistakes that Overwatch made. Like, it's literally only 2 duelists shy of the same roster makeup as Overwatch 1 at launch, although at least they didn't put a duelist in the strategist camp and pretend they're not a duelist like Overwatch did with Sim. And to reiterate, I enjoyed Marvel Rivals a lot. It was a really fun game to experience, and I'm really excited for the beta. I also don't want to act like this is the final launch roster. This is just from closed alpha, and setting aside the announcements of Venom and Adam Warlock as additions for the upcoming beta, there were nearly 40 heroes who were leaked in Datamine. Clearly, Marvel Rivals has more heroes planned, and a good number of them are presumably going to be part of launch, and there's every possibility that things will have been evened out by then. Supervive handles things a little bit differently. It has 3 roles, Fighter, Protector, and Controller, although they don't really map super cleanly onto the DPS tank support roles. Fighters include mostly what I would call DPS-ish hunters, but then there's, Kingpin, who feels like a tank in all but name. The Protectors seem to generally be the supports, but again, you've got 2 hunters that function like healers, and 1, Oath, who seems to be more of a tank but with some healing abilities. Kingpin and Oath feel a lot like Roadhog and Reinhardt to me, complete with Hook and Barrier respectively, and while that's definitely not a bad thing, it feels weird that they're in separate categories. Lastly, there's the controllers, and I don't even know what the controllers are. Celeste inflicts a lot of slows, and Void inflicts stuns, so I'm assuming that it's meant to reflect they control the battlefield by inflicting status effects. It's a weird way to split the DPS because they are functionally DPS, and you also have hunters like Bishop who fall under Fighter, but seem like they do a lot of the same stuff as the controllers in terms of having a lot of knockback. Regardless though, these roles are still super unbalanced at the end of the day. There's 9 fighters, 3 protectors, and 2 controllers. However, if we were to try and recategorize them into DPS, tank, and support, we'd probably end up with 10 DPS, 2 tanks, and 2 supports, with Oath and Kingpin as our tanks and Zeph and Luna as our supports. And again, before I go any further, I do really enjoy Supervive. I had a lot of fun with it, it was a good time, and I think it has a lot of promise. This isn't me trying to kiss ass, nor is it me trying to dunk on the game. This is just a stated concern about the future of the game because I think it might be setting itself up to struggle in the long term. I also recognize that this is still pre-launch, and a long ways away from its launch date at that. We've been told by Theorycraft that the open beta will be happening by the end of 2024, meaning that the game itself is probably close to a year away from its actual launch. And Supervive does play differently than both Rivals and Overwatch as a top-down battle royale instead of a first or third-person objective-based shooter. There's a much faster time to kill, the nature of gameplay is different, and given how the game is built around these really frantic, messy brawls with items and abilities flying everywhere, even supports are a lot more damage-oriented than I would say is normal. That'll affect the nature of the roles, and so it's just not exactly a perfect comparison. It's also important to remember that Rivals is 6v6 without role queue, or at least so far, while Overwatch is 5v5 with role queue, and Supervive operates in terms of either 2 or 4-person teams in a 40-person battle royale, which obviously affects how this stuff plays out. The problem with unbalanced roles is that it sets the game up for an uphill climb trying to balance out the roles in order to satisfy their audience. Nobody would mind much if they were only off by 1 or 2 characters one way or the other. If there'd been 6 CPS, 7 tanks, and 8 supports in Overwatch 1, I don't think it would have felt particularly unequal, but when one role is clearly favored and is getting way more heroes with way more dynamic kits, it just makes the other roles feel worse. And it's not like this is just my opinion, I'm not the only one who feels this way. It was a pretty common frustration around Overwatch 1's launch, and it is still a frustration a lot of people hold to the present day. Supports get mad that they don't have nearly as many heroes, DPS get annoyed at supports demanding more heroes as if the majority of new heroes haven't been supports, or at least the plurality of them, it's not the majority, whatever, it doesn't matter. And tanks are stuck in a frustrating middle ground where they get less than the DPS but more than the supports, and nobody seems happy with what the tanks get ever because there's only 1 per team now, and threading the needle between unkillable raid boss and community punching bags seems impossible. Early heroes in those roles, like Mercy or Reinhardt, sometimes struggle to keep up as the game evolves and changes with the new heroes, and because there's so few, it can make it especially frustrating when Overwatch expects you to swap heroes to meet the moment, and there aren't nearly as many options for your role. Anyways, this has been a lot of rambling, but it's just a bit of a concern for me that it feels like we keep seeing more and more games coming along that do have a lot of potential, that, again, are a lot of fun, but haven't seemed to realize the importance of a balanced roster across roles. Or at least a good selection of characters in each role, even if they're not perfectly equal. And look, I'm optimistic about Supervive and Marvel Rivals, and I enjoy them a lot as they are right now. I just worry that this stuff is going to cause them issues in the long term, and I want these games to survive, or supervive. Maybe this won't be an issue, maybe it'll all be fine, or maybe they'll reveal more characters between now and their proper launches that balance this out. Whatever happens, I want to see these games succeed because they are both fun games that I think could bring some real competition to the scene. And I just don't want to see them make the same mistake that's kneecapped Overwatch for a decade. And that's where I'm going to end this one. Sorry for a bit of a rambly quick video. I wanted to put this out mostly because the NDA on Supervive has finally ended and I can talk about it more publicly. I also know it's not news that I was playing Marvel Rivals during that alpha, but I haven't been able to talk about this one much yet, and I wanted to hold off talking about the topic as a whole until I could include Supervive. Speaking of, now that the embargo's over, I can also tell you guys about how to get access to it yourselves. Theorycraft gave me a handful of keys to pass out to people, and I'm going to be doing one giveaway through a charity thing that's going on, and a second one for channel members, both of which will run from Wednesday, June 26th to Sunday, June 30th. If you're a channel member, you can sign up through this community post, links in the description, since I'll need to know who actually wants it and what email to send the code to. The second giveaway is connected to the VTuber Summer Slam, which is a charity event put on by Gamers Outreach. I'm going to be streaming from June 26th to the 30th to raise money for them, and everyone who donates is entered into that giveaway. I'll be pulling for 2 winners from each giveaway each day, meaning that there are 4 opportunities each day to get a key. You can also get keys by watching Supervive streams on Twitch, where there will be random drops throughout the next week or so. That'll still leave me with a few spare keys, and once I've made sure I've gotten codes for my friends, I'll see if there's any extras that I can give away. Who knows, maybe I'll hide some in the Your Turn to Die video that's coming out on Friday to try and boost its retention. Anyways, thank you to my channel members: MiniQ, Olesp, Cage the Orc, Fish Toast, Alex Stone, Nemo the Survivor, Dextiny, Yoshi of the Wire, CatLover192, Sourdough, Illuma Riley, It's Peggy BTW, Cadence, Windex the Great, V, Deleathers, Gavost, Marsh Alice, Crimson Cyclo, Good Guy Luis, Jules Coolness, Cactine Kushler, Aikri, Hallucigeno, MV, The Only Enigma, Hazmat Bad at Games, and Mariah. Whether you're a channel member, a subscriber, or you just clicked on this video out of curiosity, thank you for watching, and I hope we'll see you around again soon.